T-minus 60 seconds and counting.
Welcome, fellow traveler, to phase 3 of this journey. Here you will experience an even deeper level of understanding as we traverse through the boundaries of hyperspace consciousness. Here, you will find that reality is altered with a single thought and a single intention. Set your intention now and prepare to travel deeper. Beyond the veil.
My own personal travels. As I've talked about before, as Frank Castle will tell you on Fearless, that comes on right before our show on Saturdays at 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock Pacific time, the higher dimensions are more made of light rather than being dense like this. But as the Egyptians write in the Book of the Dead, the soul is weighed, or the heart is weighed, I should say. And if the heart or soul is heavy, then it sinks down to the bottom. If it's light as a feather, then it floats up to the top. And there's no judgment. There's no man in the sky that's going to recite all your sins to you. It's really a matter of where does your soul resonate in the how dense is your soul? If it's dense, if you throw a pebble in the river or in a lake, it's going to sink to the bottom. If you put a feather, it may float up at the top. So I think that's what this whole cycle is. It's a cleansing. It's a way for us to deal with our karma so we can remove all of the stuff that binds us to negative energies, to this physical realm, whatever the case may be, so we can continue to progress higher and higher and higher. But the lower densities, I can only imagine, because I know coming from a higher dimension into this dimension, this is a really dense dimension. I don't know why I agreed to come back here. I think I agreed to come back here for each and every one of you out there. But when I get back, I'm going to tell them no more missions to Earth anymore. Those people are on their own after all of the hard work that we've put in that down there. So hopefully people will pick up the torch when we're gone here. Dr. Bruce Goldberg is our guest. Dr. Bruce, do we want to go down to the lower dimensions in this segment?
Well, let's talk about the different dimensions first so that people can get an understanding. Now, this is my 13-plane paradigm of dimensions. The physical plane is our dimension, or the earth plane, and every dimension has a characteristic sound, all right? And the sound of this dimension is thunder. So therefore, remember I talked about thunderstorms and teleportation. You never want to do out-of-body experiences during a thunderstorm. It's not dangerous, but you're like a salmon swimming upstream. It's going to be difficult because the tendency is to keep you down on the earth plane because of the sound. So the next dimension is called the astral plane. People are most familiar with that. The sound of that dimension is the roar of the sea, just like putting a seashell against your ear. That's divided into the upper and lower. You don't want to go to the lower. The lower is actually what you were talking about is purgatory. It's a place where people, it's just what they meant of the Bardo state of the Tibetans. It's the same principle. The lower astral plane is filled with very negative entities. It's the origin of psychic attack. And it's a nasty place. It's a very emotional dimension. The upper astral plane, however, is very different. That's where you can meet your higher self and do spiritual growth or all kinds of psychic development. There's also a museum there, which is a museum of the future. That's where people like a Bill Gates or a Tesla or a Da Vinci hang out a lot when they were alive, and Bill still is, to be able to see futuristic technology. That's where I developed my superconscious mind tap, the technique I'm known for, as well as progression therapy. Beyond the astral plane is the causal plane, which is the smallest dimension. It's characterized by the tinkling of bells like a New Age bookstore. And this is where your Akashic records are stored, the memories of all past, present, future, and parallel lives. Beyond that is what they call the mental plane, which is the sound of running water is the sound, and the sound of Om originates there. The way you know you're on the mental plane is if you look down on the highways, and you can actually drive a car in this dimension, the highways are iridescent blue in color because they make it from the dirt, which is very, very blue. It's the only dimension that has that. The buildings there are very abstract in design, and all the citizens look like little angels wearing white smocks. It's a very, very spiritual dimension. Beyond that is the etheric plane, which is characterized by the sound of buzzing of bees. It's a very low-keyed kind of buzzing. It's you can see stars 24/7. It's the largest dimension, and the reason why it's significant more than any of the other dimensions is because your etheric body would occupy the etheric plane, just like your astral body to the astral plane. The etheric body is the only spiritual body that's identical to the physical body. So on the etheric plane, if you have a disease that's incurable and or some other major medical problem, there are etheric plane surgeons that can actually heal the etheric body. And there are techniques that I call this etheric plane surgery, where you can transfer the healing from the etheric body to the physical. And in my Soul Healing book, I wrote about a case of cancer and AIDS that I treated. I didn't cure them. The etheric plane surgeons did. Okay, so it's a very low percentage technique, but when it works, it's great. The soul plane, now the etheric plane to the physical plane represents the 5 planes of the karmic cycle. All right. Now, after you die or cross into spirit, or whatever term you want to use, you go to the soul plane, which is characterized by the single note of a flute. And this plane is where you can ascend from if you perfected your karmic cycle, or you use that dimension to reincarnate to any of the lower 5 planes. You don't have to pick the earth plane every time. You can pick others. And that's called the soul plane. Beyond that are 7 other dimensions that make up what we call the higher planes, which you're now perfect to enter into. It's described by, or characterized by indescribable orchestra-type music is heard continually. There's no perpetrators, there's no victims. It's basically nirvana or heaven. The 13th, or the highest of the higher planes, is called the God or nameless plane, and that's where the God energy complex resides. So those are the dimensions from my 13-plane paradigm. And when people, the reason I lay it out like this way, when your listeners, if they want to go out of the body, they know where they are, rather than just saying, well, I was out of the body. Well, wouldn't it be nice to know which dimension you were on, okay? It's like a GPS system here. And so as we discussed out-of-body experience, I just want to reinforce again the offer that I'm making to your listeners. If they buy my Exploring the Fifth Dimension book from my site and mention the Beyond the Veil show, then they will get a free fifth dimensional travel CD, which will guide them through self-hypnosis into the fifth dimension, and they can experience all the things we're discussing here.
Fantastic. Let me describe a dimension for you, and maybe you can put it in context for me.
All right.
So I visited this dimension twice, or I believe this was the same dimension. The first time, it was very dark, and I saw a lot of the light was a dark pink and a purple. I could see these beings off in the distance, and these buildings were there. The buildings were darker. The beings were dark as well, and they had glowing eyes. Now, when I revisited the dimension, it was something completely different, but I think what had changed was not the dimension, but rather I was the one that changed, because all of a sudden I can see the same layout, except for it was golden. It was huge. It was a pyramid, and there was this energy, this female energy sitting on top of the pyramid, radiating this energy out to basically the rest of the dimension. And I mean, it was just golden and bright and beautiful, completely made out of light. And the beings were the same beings, except for I could see what they actually look like, and I could see what these structures look like. But this light was so overwhelming, and the only way that I can describe it is just a gold yellow brilliance and radiance to this entire dimension.
Okay, now the key issue here, the key point, I think you're describing the upper astral plane. Remember, you create your own reality there. There are certain limitations, but if you want to have blue breath coming out of your body, you can do that in the fifth dimension. There's no physical laws, as we say. How did you feel when you were experiencing it? Did you feel fearful, or did you feel like uplifted and spiritually positive while you were doing this?
It was complete and total awe. Let me pick it up on the other side. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about all of the different dimensions with Dr. Bruce Goldberg right here on Beyond the Veil.
My dear traveler, remember this. Whatever plane our consciousness may be acting in, both we and the things belonging to that plane are, for the time being, our only realities. However, if we mistake the shadows for realities, we find ourselves confusing the upward progress of the ego as an elevation of consciousness. Thus, beware of oneself. when you step beyond the veil.
We are really journeying to different dimensions this evening with Dr. Bruce Goldberg. And we were talking about this other dimension, this dimension of gold, lights, and not too much sound, but it was almost like a celebration. It was this royal, there was this regalness to this energy that was standing on top of this pyramid, guards all around, but not guarding from anything. It was just more of a regal scene. And Bruce, you asked me how I felt when I entered this dimension, and I felt like I was home. That's the only way to describe it. But I was standing in the presence of this regal entity, of this royal entity, and there was just so much awe that it was very hard to contain myself. But it was, I don't know how to put this into words. It wasn't like a regal energy, like a king or queen here that, bow and worship me, or not even a Yahweh type energy, but rather it was more of a divinity that just inspired awe rather than anything else. I came out of it feeling like it was the ninth dimension. I don't know why, but that's what I got from it. What are your thoughts?
Don't worry about the dimension. I know you get the ninth dimension. Don't worry about that, because everything is artificial when it comes to those classifications. Like the East Indians have 7 dimensions, and Mayans have 13. I have 13. Don't worry about that, okay? This is the key. If you feel, this is one thing the lower astral plane cannot generate. If you're on the lower astral plane, you will never be able to generate feelings of love and peace. And that's what you were getting from what I get that. You were very peaceful. You felt secure, comfortable, positive vibes. That's the upper astral plane or beyond. It could be other dimensions, but it's not the lower astral. That's what counts. You don't want to go to the lower astral. And see, people, when they go to sleep at night, this is one of the things I want to give some hints as to how they can go out of the body and not go to the lower astral. If you, half an hour before going to bed, if you deal with like watching the 11 o'clock news or arguing with your spouse or worrying about whatever, your soul is going to leave the body at night. It's going to leave through the third chakra, which is the solar plexus or belly button area. And the only place you can go to is the lower astral plane. So most people go through the lower astral plane on a regular basis. Not a good concept. If you want to eliminate that, don't deal with negativity 20 minutes or 30 minutes before going to bed. Play a CD or music or just relax, meditate, whatever you want to do. But don't do anything negative. Do that early in the evening. Then you can leave through the crown chakra just above the top of the head, and that's what I train my patients and people who deal with my materials to do, so they can go to the upper astral plane. So that's critical. So let's talk a little bit about techniques about doing out-of-body experience. So these are hints, okay? First, warm weather. Oh, by the way, a term here. I'm going to give a new term for your audience. If you travel into the fifth dimension, which is out of the body, or parallel universes, we're going to discuss that next, and it's the same principle, you are now known as an ultra-terrestrial. That's the term. Anytime you enter the fifth dimension, you're not an extraterrestrial, you're an ultra-terrestrial. Okay? So we learned a new term today. All right, so let's focus in on some hints. Warm weather favors astral voyages. I call this astral voyaging. You want to keep your room a few degrees above room temperature when you do this. Do not attempt out-of-body experiences or astral projection techniques during a thunderstorm. As I mentioned, you're working against the system of the Earth plane. You want to wear very loose clothing or nothing at all. You want to make your initial attempts in complete darkness or in very dim light. You don't want to have a bright light. It's distracting. You make sure there's dead silence. You don't want to have music in the background or any distracting sounds, I should say. TV things going. Don't do that. Just make it as quiet as possible. Practicing alone is better, okay? And you want to time your trials late at night. Normally right before going to bed is a good time. And this is a key one that's very important. We don't even know the origin of this, although I have a suspicion. You want to lie on your right side. Never lie on your left side. The ancients, the Egyptians, and other Sumerians, etc., who did this will tell you that the left was always evil, the right was good. I don't know that's because 90% of people are right-handed in this country. I don't know what that was the reason. But for some reason, the left side doesn't work real well. And it doesn't. And there's a lot of reasons, a lot of studies to show that. So lie on your right side if you're going to lie on your side. You may experience paralysis. You can eliminate that by using spiritual protection techniques, which are on all my CDs. Now, you also, as far as food is concerned, you want to cut down on food intake or even fast prior to an out-of-body experience technique. You don't want to have a filet mignon steak, okay? It takes 36 hours to digest, and it's not going to be good. You don't want to eat anything just prior to the actual experience. You can drink fluids or, that's fine. If you're going to eat anything at all, you want to eat mainly fruits and vegetables. You don't want to eat nuts of any kind, and especially peanuts. You don't want to go through a bodily function while you're trying to go out of the body. You want to, now this is a biggie. This is very important and not a popular recommendation. Abstain from any and all recreational drugs. Alcohol, tobacco, or any recreational drugs are a no-no. If you ignore that advice, you're going to wind up on the lower astral plane, and you're not going to like the trip.
Oh, absolutely. I would go so far as to venture to say that illegal drugs, that's not a good term, heroin, methamphetamines, cocaine, these all purposefully put you in that state to where you're susceptible to lower frequency entities, and then you go into those lower vibrations and you vibrate at a lower frequency here on this earth full time. And I think that's by design. I think those kind of drugs, including alcohol, I would put that in those categories too. I mean, alcohol, you call them spirits, and because they do have spirits. We don't drink at all. And I recommend that people don't drink alcohol, period, to keep themselves in that higher frequency.
Now, the psychic attack is a little bit of a category that's relevant to this as a pyramidal category, because what happens if you do the recreational drugs, which I always tell people never do, okay, you're going to have a grayish tinge to your auric field. Your auric field has the 7 rainbow colors. It's a question of which one dominates. So if you have a grayish tinge to your auric field because you're now high, then you're going to attract lower astral entities, and they want to kill us. They can't, but they can annoy us, and they annoy us by psychic attack. So let me give you an example of how you can cure bereavement by going out of the body. All right, this is a case that it's very cute, and it's I'm very proud of this case. I'm calling this woman Fran, not her real name. She lost her pet dog, Bonzo. Now, I'm a dog activist. Anybody who knows me out there, if you listen to me on other shows, I love dogs. I love dogs better than most people, okay? All right. So Fran had her dog, Bonzo, that she lost a year before. Bonzo was a beautiful St. Bernard, and because of several untreatable medical conditions, she had to put him down. This resulted in unbelievable bereavement to Fran. Now, Fran's best friend was a former patient of mine, so she refers it to me. So she comes into my office and she goes, and she's like, a year after this death, and she's still crying and depressed and, everything you don't want to see in a person. So I said, look, let me do some superconscious mind taps, training you to access your higher self, and then my solution to you is to meet Bonzo. She goes, what do you mean? He died a year ago. And I said, he's on the astral plane. How about we take you to meet him? And she goes, whatever, she didn't know what I was doing. So I trained her to do out-of-body experiences. We did an out-of-body experience in the office. And so she goes to the upper astral plane, and all of a sudden she's got tears coming down her face, but now they're tears of bliss, not tears of depression or bereavement. And she cannot believe this. She goes, this is unbelievable, all right? So now I'm done with her, right? So now she tells me that she calls me about a week or two later, and she goes, she had a dream in which Okay.
I hate to cut you off. Yeah, we do have a hard break. Okay. They're all completely automated, so my apologies. We'll be right back. Let's pick it up right on the other side. All right, let's jump right back into it. Dr. Bruce Goldberg is our guest. And Dr. Bruce, again, the apologies for the breaks, but Very, very fascinating information. I'm wondering if you're using any kind of hypnotic techniques, because I'm listening so intently that I'm not even paying attention to the clock. So take us away, please.
Okay, so I was talking about Fran, who lost her dog Bonzo, and I took her out of the body so she could meet the departed Bonzo on the upper astral plane, and she did, and she has these tears of bliss coming down, and she's very happy. So now a week goes by, she's done, I'm complete, the bereavement is gone, and she's very happy. And she tells me she had a dream in which Bonzo, remember, Bonzo was the Saint Bernard, and that's the only kind of dog she liked. She didn't like any other kind of dog. That's why she didn't get another dog. And she said she had a dream in which Bonzo reincarnated as a German Shepherd puppy and came back to Fran as a pet. And she goes, that's weird. She goes, I don't want to have a German Shepherd. I mean, I love dogs, but I want to have if I'm going to get another dog, it's going to be Saint Bernard. And I said, okay, well, listen, the universe is trying to do something, so why don't you just, work with it? Keep me posted. Now, the following week, she went to a local mall, and she absentmindedly left her car unlocked. Not the door open, but unlocked. And when she returned, in the front seat, there was a German Shepherd puppy. Okay? Fran had no idea. No, wait. Fran had no idea how the dog got there. But the door was unlocked. You say, well, but who would put it there? A neighbor or a friend? If anybody knows her, knows that she wants to have a Saint Bernard, okay? So this puppy had no collar, was not identified anyway. She took him home, and she decided, well, I'm going to just keep him, and I don't know what to do with him. But then she fell in love with the dog, right? And so now she tells me that he passed what we call the Dalai Lama test. This is the reincarnation of Bonzo, and let me show you how. The Dalai Lama test, they see a child after the Dalai Lama dies, supposed to reincarnate. They're supposed to be given some sign, and they take him into a room with 50 toys, and maybe 3 of them are the favorite toys of the previous Dalai Lama. If the kid picks the right toys, he's the Dalai Lama, reincarnate, okay? So she did that with Bonzo. She put a bunch of toys, and Bonzo had a favorite toy. This dog picked it up and, of course, exhibited many of the other qualities of Bonzo. She named him Squire. Squire then went into the backyard, immediately dug up one of Bonzo's old favorite toys, too. So here's an example of reincarnation with a dog, as well as curing bereavement by going out of the body. The key issue here was out of the body. And when she had the dream of Bonzo reincarnating, that was a progression or age progression dream. That was also an out-of-body experience, as I mentioned earlier. So that's where I put this into the out-of-body experience category.
Wow. Now, there was a story that comes to mind. I think it was a few months ago. I didn't get a chance to fact check it, so maybe you can shed some light on this. But it was supposedly a little boy in Thailand or an an Asian country, and he was able to identify his killer. He came back. He was about 5-6 years old. He said, look, this guy killed me. He had a birthmark that showed where he supposedly was killed with a knife or sword or whatever the object was, and was able to go point out his body.
Well, I'm familiar with the case. This was an Ian Stevenson research case. It was in India, by the way.
India. Yes.
And what happened was that the kid was, not only, remember, the kid is pointing out, he's got the scar, he was stabbing a knife, in the chest or the heart, whatever, somewhere in the chest. And he has the scar for that. Now, Ian Stevenson's worked in the latter part of his life. He passed away several years ago. But in the latter part of his life, his more recent books, or the latter books, would show that some people reincarnate with injuries from previous lives. And this kid was one of them. So they go back to the village, and they find the guy who was the murderer of him in the past life. Now, this kid is speaking with adult vocabulary. This kid's 5 years old, and he's talking about having a mistress in the city and, all these things that little 5-year-olds don't talk about, right? So they point out to he identifies the killer. Well, the guy says, I don't know what you're talking about. I did nothing. He's a punk. Get away from me. So then the kid finds the skeleton of his previous life body, and the forensic evidence identified the guy that he pointed out as the killer, and he was brought to justice.
Wow.
That was the end of the story, okay? He finds his body of his previous life. How much more evidence do you need, okay? Because he remembered where he was killed, okay? And, of course, the forensic evidence was a big thing, too. So, so it's a very good case, by the way. It's an Ian Stevenson case. And it just shows you the evidence of, one of my famous cases was made into a CBS movie. It was a woman who was obsessively attracted to a married man she was dating. She was a young 26-year-old woman. And
I get that all the time. No, not really.
Yeah, Sherry wants to hear more stories like that. It's okay. So, okay, Sherry, I got a 5-bedroom house. Okay, don't worry about it. So what happens is that this woman was obsessively attracted. This guy tried to murder her on 3 different occasions. I saw her after the last attempt. She came in beaten up, bruised. I don't know how she got on a plane to see me. She was in really bad shape. Well, as it turns out, in 1927 in Buffalo, New York, her name was Grace Doze, and she was murdered by this man named, I call him Johnny. He was a bootlegger, and this is the Roaring Twenties now, from Detroit. And it was she gave me about 24 facts. The CBS documented the case. It was a fully documented case. There were things she told me that were not reported by newspaper reports. 2 factors actually she gave me were different than newspaper reports. As it turns out, she was right. The reporters were wrong. And the only way you found that out is by going into the health records, which you're not allowed to do unless you're a family member or you have permission from the governor's office, which requires a paper trail, which nobody did for like 67 years. So this was one of the most documented cases of the last century, and that was made into a CBS movie called The Search for Grace. It's a great little film. It was aired on CBS and a bunch of cable networks. So my point is that these are documented cases if you like documents. The one thing I want to talk about just for a few seconds is some of the entities you'll meet in the fifth dimension. Okay, one is departed souls. So if you've lost a grandparent or anybody else, and this includes pets too, you can meet them in the fifth dimension. You can meet them what we call a sanctuary technique, I call that. You can meet people who are going through near-death experiences. This would be like the upper astral plane too. You can meet spirit guides, angels, your own higher self, the perfect part of your soul. You can meet anybody practicing out-of-body techniques, fifth-dimensional voyages, as I call them. And you can also meet the good ETs. This is the upper astral plane or beyond, like the Pleiadians, for example. And there are times when, if you do this right, and you can meet time travelers from our future, the chrononauts. And I talk about that in my time travelers training program, where these are techniques designed to get you into this fifth-dimensional experience where you can actually summon and meet a time traveler from our future. I've documented them in several of my books, and my patients have too. So these are the kind of entities you can meet when you go out of the body. It's all perfectly safe. Now, what can you do? What are the advantages? Why go to the fifth dimension other than titillation? Well, for one thing, you eliminate the fear of death. That's a biggie, as I mentioned. You can contact, again, lost loved ones. I mentioned about you can see some of them or your spirit guides. You can do something called astral negotiation. This is really cool. This is a technique I developed many years ago, actually, where let's say you're working with somebody or somebody in your life is causing you a real problem. It could be a spouse. Sherry, are you listening to this? Okay.
Intently.
It could be an employee, it could be a neighbor, it could be anyone. And no matter what you do, they're not going to change, okay? They don't like you. So what you can do is you go to the upper astral plane, you form a sanctuary like a conference room, you summon their soul with their higher self to the to the room, and then you can work out the differences, which will be reflected on the earth plane when they awake the following morning.
Fascinating. It makes me wonder if when babies are born, if they remember how they died. And some babies are afraid of water, for instance, because they might have drowned in a past life.
Remember all those years ago when you couldn't sleep? Remember the dream? I haven't.
Welcome back, traveler. Take a deep breath and relax. As we continue to journey deeper beyond the veil.
As I've mentioned so many times before, the clips we play during the breaks are completely random, but they always play with such synchronicity to what we're talking about during the broadcast. That was a clip from Steve Jobs right before he died, and the message there was, when you conquer the fear of death, then all of a sudden everything's possible. And when he realized that he was going to die at some point because of his cancer, that's when things really started to speed up, and he worked really hard to get things moving as quickly as possible. Now imagine if we just applied that to our lives right now. What kind of potential can we unlock within ourselves? I remember when we first started the broadcast, it was just a small broadcast. We didn't think it was going to grow to the size that it is now. We didn't think that we would be at the level that we are now. And we realized that the glass ceiling was inside of our own heads, and we created it all ourselves. And once we broke that glass ceiling, not even broke it, once we realized that it didn't exist, then all doors became possible. Then we were truly able to step beyond the veil. What if you apply that in your life right now, this very moment? What do you think?
I think that it's very possible to not only envision your dreams, but to actually attain them. And when you are working in a higher frequency, when you are able to use the techniques that Dr. Goldberg is talking about to grab your dreams and make them a reality.
Exactly. Dr. Goldberg, you mentioned about being able to do soul negotiations with people's higher selves.
Yeah, I really like that.
What about finding your own path in these higher realms? Maybe you can guide people a little bit on how they can pull the information out to find their purpose, the reason that they're here in this plane of existence.
Well, I have the Astral Voyaging CD album that I have, which has various techniques of going out of the body. One title is called Access the Akashic Records, and that's really the key that you're talking about. This is how you can find your karmic purpose. Because, see, most people, I find, when they're depressed, America's the fattest country in the world, and we have the highest level of type 2 diabetes, the highest divorce rate, so there's a lot of unhappy campers in this country. Mm-hmm. And the reason being is because people have lost their passion. They do things, they work because they want to pay their bills, they only like their job, they don't like their employers, there's a lot of problems involved. So what you want to do is do something that you're designed to do, that you have passion for, and yes, you can support your family with that, that's fine, you can find that. But the point is that the soul's purpose is actually stored on these fifth-dimensional computer disks that we call the Akashic Records, stored on the causal plane, but you can access it from any dimension. And so therefore, the Access the Akashic Records is one of my more popular titles because people use that to not just find about past and future lives, yes, they can do that too, but really to find out what their karmic purpose is. So that would be the recommendation as to how to do that.
The Akashic Records, I liken that to the database on a computer program or website. Most websites are programmed with PHP, which is a dynamic type of language, and it accesses data based on a database. All of the data exists within that database, but the program is actually pulling out a little bit at a time. That's the way that I perceive reality as well, that it all exists in the Akashic Records, everything that can be and ever will be, and it's just a matter of our brains interpreting one piece of data at a time, but then we can hack the system, hack the matrix, and jump back over into that database, retrieve whatever information we can, and use that.
Well, that's what a psychic is doing. A real talented psychic. I'm not talking about the con artists that are out there, but the real talented psychics. They're actually reading your Akashic Records. But these databases are the only database that WikiLeaks can't hack into. So you're actually kind of safe when you do this. But what I want to discuss now are parallel universes. This is I have a technique I developed called the New You technique, where people can not only perceive the future of this life in their current frequency of a parallel universe, but also a current universe, but also parallel universe. So let's say that you have a life where whatever you do in life, you're just not going to grow beyond a certain level. Maybe you have a criminal record. Maybe you lost an arm or have some disease or so much post-traumatic stress disorder from issues of whatever that you just are limited, and there really isn't much of a choice or a future that's going to be positive. I don't ever recommend suicide, of course. So what's the option? Well, here's the option. You can, using hypnosis and these techniques, you can actually perceive how you live with the same DNA, the same genetic component of your body now, in a real Earth plane. This is not an out-of-body experience now, in a parallel universe, a sister universe that exists side by side, that modern physics, by the way, documents. There's no really argument in the field about parallel universes. They exist. We got that originally from Einstein. We've got it from Hugh Everett III in Princeton University in 1957, the multiverse concept. That's where it developed. So there really isn't any argument about the theory. So let me give you an example of a woman that I worked with years ago who was able to use these techniques to improve. Let me show you what happened. I took her into my experience shows that even though there's technically an infinite number of parallel universes, they fit into 5 groups. So I call them frequency 1 through 5. So I got her through hypnosis, and this was the years 1990 to 95. And the first frequency she comes up with, by the way, she was depressed, she was overweight, she had relationship problems when I met her. She was like in her late 20s, around 30 or so. So frequency 1, she loses a job, remains unemployed for 6 months, no functional relationship, eventually a new job, but then it pays less, and she's more stressed, depressed, and gains 20 pounds. So that's a very poor frequency. The second frequency was really her current path, the same job, no significant changing in her patterns, occasional dating, but no serious relationship. Her finances improved somewhat. Okay, so that's her current path. Frequency 3 was even below average, where she has the same job, health problems emerge, skin disorders, insomnia, long-term relationship with a man ends by 1994 in frustration, and a weight gain of about 10 pounds, and she moves back to Northern California, where she's from. Now, frequency 4 is a biggie. She meets a successful businessman, 1-year engagement, marries him, has 2 children, a son and a daughter. She is very happy. They moved to Brentwood, and if you know Los Angeles, you're in the upscale area. She loses 8 pounds, opens up a small boutique, and is very successful. Frequency 5 is above average, but not quite the number 4. She, in 1992, meets an actor in Hollywood. What's the odds, huh? A good relationship, gets married, he quits acting and is employed with a computer company. She has 1 child, moderately happy, but still has to work in a job she doesn't quite like. So in all these frequencies, number 4 was the best. So she selected it, and I programmed her to switch tracks. So this is what she contacts me back in 1996, and she says, I said, what's going on? And she goes, she got married to a man named Ted, not his real name, of course, a successful businessman. By that time, she was the proud mother of a 3.5-year-old son, 2-year-old daughter. They live in Brentwood, and she owns a small boutique that is doing quite well. You see? So she was able to get her ideal frequency and switch paths without having to do anything strange. Now, what happens in the other frequencies when people do that? They always say, what's going to happen? They're going to go on. You're just not aware of it. Just like if you're watching a TV show. Let's say you're watching a football game on CBS. You're watching the AFC, and all of a sudden somebody says, hey, you got to watch the NFC on Fox. You know, it's a great game. It's in the fourth quarter, whatever. So you switch your remote and you switch channels. What happens to the CBS game? Nothing. It goes on. You're just not watching it. You see? So this is like changing channels. That's what these frequencies are. They're real universes. And by the way, the closest sister universe to us, according to Scientific American, the August issue of the year 2000, where they did a full magazine, the main topic was parallel universes, is less than a millimeter away. A millimeter is a 40th of an inch. That's how close the nearest sister universe is. Okay?
Did you say a millimeter away?
A millimeter. That's
I thought it was 18 inches. I don't know where I heard 18 inches.
Well, I'm just telling you, I deal with real science, okay? This is Scientific American, and they're quoting astrophysicists and geophysicists. So it just shows you now there are universes all over the place, but they're talking about the closest sister universe to us. But they're different. They're separate. You don't have any interaction with those sister universes, okay, unless you switch paths. So even though there could be like in certain parallel universes, my research shows that the British won the Revolutionary War. Hitler wins World War II in one parallel universe and using ET technology.
Amazing. Bruce, we've got the final segment coming up in just a few moments. I can't believe this hour just flew by, but we'll be right back.